This is a roulade. It's a souffle baked flat in a jelly roll pan and then rolled up with a delicious something as a filling. Add this to your store of culinary tricks when we have sudden company today on The French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child. You know, I think that unexpected guests are rather fun as long as it doesn't happen every day and you don't have too many at once. But I think if you have a few little culinary tricks that you can do, you're really usually pretty well off. The main thing is to have the basics in your refrigerator at all times, like eggs, cream, butter, cheese, milk, and then a few of the ordinary staples on your shelf. And then you can produce, really, at the spur of the moment, some very nice things, such as with pastry, you can bake them a quiche. You can always go into an omelette routine, or you could have crêpes farcies, those delicious little French pancakes stuffed with something like crab and gratiné, and that always impresses people very much. Another thing that I like to do is the roulade, which is this souffle, which all you need is the cheese base, and then it depends on what else you have on hand that you can mix it with. And this is just a plain souffle mixture, which goes flat in the pan. And I'm going to put this in the oven and bake it right now so that you can see exactly how it's going to look when it comes out. So I want you to see the whole business. It's just being spread. You usually think of the souffle being just done in a high pan, but you can really bake it in anything like this. And then this is called a roulade, or it's called a souffle roulé in French, or a rolled souffle. And I'm going to put it right now in the oven. And I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes. So I want to be sure that you see exactly how it's supposed to look when it comes out. And now, as always, when you're doing anything like a cake or a souffle, you have your order of battle, and you've read your recipe, and you've set your ovens, in this case 425 degrees, and then you prepare your pan. And this is an ordinary jelly roll pan that's been buttered, and then it has wax paper with a little overhang, and that's been buttered, and then flour has been rolled around in it, and the excess is knocked off, just the way you do a cake pan. And now we're ready to begin, because we have all the preliminaries done. And as you remember, we've done souffles before, and all it is a very thick sauce, plus a flavoring, plus, in this case, egg yolks to enrich it, and then beaten egg whites to give it its puff. And the very thick sauce is our old lady friend Bechamel. And if you're going to make a cream filling, which we're going to make because I'm going to use cream broccoli, the cream filling also has a bechamel. So that as long as you're going to have to have a bechamel for both of the things, make it double. So here we begin with a double bechamel. And for this, we're going to start out with 1 whole stick of butter and 2/3 cup of flour. And this is the same rule that we've had before. The rule is for a thick sauce, a thick white sauce, you have 3 tablespoons of butter for each cup of milk you're going to use. And I'm going to use 3 cups of milk. So I want 3 tablespoons, you want 3 tablespoons of flour for each cup of milk that you're going to use. I'm going to use 3 cups of milk, so I need 9 tablespoons of flour, which comes to be just about 2/3 cup of flour. And this starts out as always with the roux, the thickening agent. And you want to cook this roux until it froths and foams for about 2 minutes without turning more than a nice buttery yellow. And the amount of butter you use, you want just enough butter so that you have a mixture in your roux which is soft enough to stir around. In this case, that was 4 ounces or 1 stick. If you don't have quite enough, it's very hard to stir the butter and flour mixture together. And then after that, it's frothed and foamed for 2 minutes. You then take it off heat and let it stop bubbling. It's still bubbling a little bit. And then we want to add the milk. But rather than adding all of the 3 cups of milk at once, add about 2½ cups of it. Because you can always add more milk if you want. But what you want is a very thick sauce, so it's better to add less first and then add more later. Now that has thickened up a great deal more, so we'll put in more milk. And beat that around. As you can see, that is very, very thick. So that was, I'll go over those proportions again. That was for the double bechamel. That was 4 ounces of butter, 2/3 cups of flour, and 2½ to 3 cups of milk. You want to be sure that you're using a heavy bottom pan. Now, look at how very thick that is. You take that up. When you say thick white sauce, you see that practically holds its shape in the spatula. And that's just what you want, because we're going to thin it down a little bit later. I want about ½ a teaspoon of salt, some white pepper, and a little bit of nutmeg. There's a little bit of a nutmeg grater with a nutmeg in the top. You just go flick, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just a little tiny bit to give a little speck of nutmeg, which always gives a nice flavor to a cheese sauce, which we're going to do. And now I'm going to divide this in half. This pan, the smaller pan, is going to be the sauce that's going to be my creamed filling. And that I want to have thinned out a little more, so I put some more milk in that. Then I'm going to keep that over hot water. Beat her up. We always say it's easy to thin down, but it's not so easy to thicken it. And then, because you don't want it to crust on the top, clean the sauce off the sides of the pan all around, and then float either a little bit of milk or cream on top, and that will prevent a skin from forming. See, that's now covered with cream or milk. I mean, this is milk in this case. Then I'm going to set it in a pan of hot water. You don't need a double boiler. I think it's a nuisance because it's usually bad quality. This is just a low frying pan. Set your ordinary pan in, put a cover on. Then you don't have to clutter up your kitchen with a whole lot of stuff. I think you have to have so many things anyway. I sometimes think the less you have, the better off you are. And now we're ready to start in on the souffle proper with this very thick white sauce. That's going to be the reason, as you're going to see, because this is going to have egg yolks in it, that the egg yolks are going to thin it out. And so that's why you start out very thick to begin with. And now if you're going to make only the souffle, I'll give you the proportions for that, because you may not always want a cream filling. So that would be 4 tablespoons of butter, 4.5 tablespoons of flour, and 1.5 cups of milk. In other words, just half of what we just did. And now, as all soufflés, they have eggs in them. And we're going to have 6 eggs in here. And so we have a clean, dry egg beating bowl, and the whites go into the egg beating bowl, and the yolks, one by one, get beaten into the thick white sauce. And if you're not sure of your egg breaking technique, be sure to break the whites first into a little bowl and then pour them into the big bowl, because if you get any yolks into the whites, you've had it. They're not going to rise properly. Now we want 4 more egg yolks, so there are 4 more. And then in they go. You see already, just because the egg yolks have gone in, that's thinned out the sauce quite a bit. And now we're going to have the egg whites. I have 2 egg whites in this bowl now, and so I'm going to add 4 more. That makes 6 egg whites. And as you remember, 1 egg white, these are grated large eggs. 1 egg white is about 2 tablespoons, so that would be about 3/4 cup. And now we're going to beat them. You can say, well, I've seen all this before. Well, that's what cooking's all about. You see it more and more and more, that you do the same thing. I'm going to do it with a hand beater. It's very important when you're beating egg whites that they be at room temperature, otherwise they won't melt properly. And if they're chilled, just set the bowl in very hot water and test with your finger to take the chill off. Now you first start, you see, rather slowly until the egg whites have foamed up. See, they've completely foamed, and now you add a little more than 1/4 tablespoon of cream of tartar and a nice pinch of salt. And these, I think, are very important additions in keeping the egg whites up and keeping them stable. And then another important thing I have found is that you have to really start rather gradually. Because I found with this little beater it does things very, very fast, and the other day I was beating up the egg whites and they just beat up a little bit too fast and they didn't hold. So it's much better to beat them a little more slowly than a little faster. Now that was, I might have said, I have an idea, I said a 1/4 tablespoon of cream of tartar. It was a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar and a pinch of salt. I think you'll find if you use the cream of tartar, it helps a great deal. I think those are melting very nicely now. And it looks as though they were almost it. Not quite. But remember not to try and make them go too fast. I have another type of beater at home which is much slower. And I couldn't understand what had happened the other day with these egg whites because they went up so fast. Now as you can see there, you have your little peak. And the egg whites, when you sometimes see directions that say stiff but not dry, as you can see, that has that lovely silken sheen, and they do hold in the bowl, and they hold in the spoon, and that's exactly right. Look at that little peak coming up. So those are properly beaten egg whites, and I think they're so easy to do, there shouldn't be any reason for being afraid of them. Now these get folded into the souffle mixture, but you always take about a quarter of them and stir them in here to lighten the mixture. Particularly when you have this rather thick sauce. This is exactly the same as we've done with everything else in the way of folding. And then take the rest of the egg whites and put them on top. And as always, you put the lighter mixture on top of the heavier mixture. And we also have about a cup or 4 ounces of grated Swiss cheese, and that's going to gradually be folded in with the egg whites. I have an enormous hotel-size spatula, which is very good for this. And this same old folding job that we've done so much of, it's really sort of a plunk scoop. And as always, as in cakes and anything else, the idea is to keep the volume of the egg whites up. And now as soon as that is properly folded, in it goes into the pan. And be sure that this pan is very thoroughly buttered and floured, particularly around the edges, because if it isn't properly buttered and floured, you may have trouble getting the paper off afterwards. There. See, that's lovely, and that has stayed up beautifully. And this goes into the oven in the middle level for 15 minutes, and I think it's best to bake it right away. You can, if you make the souffle mixture ahead, as you know, as we've done before, you can let it sit in its bowl and then bake it. Now that's a 425 oven in the middle level. Now our other souffle, we trust, is perfectly done, and we'll take a look. Beautiful. Away some of this cheese. Now, you see, when it's done, it rises up and the top cracks very slightly. And if you take, I'm going to put something under here so that you can see it. And if you take a little knife and poke down in, it's perfectly, the knife comes out perfectly dry. In other words, it's done. And also there's the very, very slightest shrinkage from the pan. So after this, what I like to do is to have some toasted breadcrumbs. These are white breadcrumbs which were toasted and lightly browned in the oven and then tossed with butter. And put that on top. That also is going to make it easier to unmold later. And then I think it's a good idea to let it sit for five minutes just to settle down, with a piece of wax paper on the top, and then a tray or a cookie sheet over it. I don't know what our grandmothers did. They didn't have wax paper. It must have been very difficult. And now you can keep this warm for half an hour or so, and I think one of the best ways to do it, is going to turn over now, is to put it over hot water. I have an electric skillet here, and that's just going to sit there. And it can keep warm for a good half hour. And while it's doing that, we can get to the filling. We just make everything just as neat as a pin here, which is unusual, I must say. But what I have, you can use any kind of filling you want. And I just happen to have some absolutely lovely fresh broccoli that was peeled, cooked rapidly in the French manner, and then just chopped up. And I've got about 3 or 4 cups here. You could use, so you might have some mushrooms or you might have some canned crab. whatever you had, if you're going to wanted it creamed this way, you would cook it in just about the same way. And the first thing is, I've got, here's some, I happen to have some melted butter, just plain butter. First you want to season it a little bit with about 2-3 tablespoons of butter. And I like to put in a little bit of chopped shallot or scallion. That's another thing I think one should always have on hand. And just saute that for just a moment. I'm even going to put in a little bit more butter. You can put in less if you want. But I think to have the broccoli absorb the butter just makes it absolutely lovely. Stir that around, and you want to be sure that you very carefully season it. This has just had a little bit of salt in the cooking. But just about 2 or 3 minutes. It depends on how well you had cooked the broccoli ahead of time. Of course, you can use ready processed broccoli, but there just isn't anything like the fresh. Then after you've stirred that around for a moment or two, you might have, if you have a little bit of fresh, a little bit of cream, put that in. And then I have, of course, I have this sauce, the cream sauce, so I'll put a little bit of that in. It's too big a whip. What you want is just about enough to enrobe it. And I think also a little bit of cheese is good. Then let this simmer for a minute or two. Now I'm going to put a little cheese in, about 2 or 3 or 4 tablespoons of Swiss cheese. Then let that simmer and absorb. You want it to be, I don't think it sounds very nice in English, but in the French say onctueuse or unctuous. And taste it very carefully. Just make sure that everything is absolutely deliciously seasoned. And also, you may need to simmer it 2 or 3 minutes because it wouldn't have cooked enough. Very good. I just love it. Well, I happen to be very pro broccoli. But you see the consistency of this now. It's spreadable, and it tastes absolutely delicious. So, what could be nicer? Now, I have a platter for it, and I'm just going to put the platter on water. And now, there we lift off, that's lifting off the jelly roll pan. And if this was properly cooked and properly buttered, the paper should come off quite easily, which it does. Hooray! That's the reason for the flouring and buttering, because it makes it very easy to take the paper off. But you see, that's still nice and warm, and your broccoli filling is nice and warm. And so you can now spread the filling on to the roulade. And if you could do this perfectly well ahead, and the roulade keeps warm perfectly well for for half an hour, and you can even reheat it. Some people, I have a friend who makes a cheese roulade like this cold, and then fills it with cream cheese and salmon caviar. And she says it's absolutely delicious, which I imagine it probably is. Now, that's ready to roll now. You see, that's all over it. And then you roll it just exactly like a jelly roll. And one reason you have your wax paper is so that it helps you to roll it. If you may remember, we did a French jelly roll, which preceded a rather strange-looking bûche de Noël. Every time I make a bûche de Noël, it looks rather messy. Now this looks messy on the bottom, but that doesn't make any difference because that's going to be on the bottom. Get it off onto the platter. And we still have breadcrumbs. And we even have parsley, so if anything is a little bit messy, cover it up. That's what parsley is for, and that is one of the reasons that you have these breadcrumbs. Let's see which is the nicest end to show you. Then you can always have a little parsley and put it around the sides. Actually, I think something like tomato would be better. You can, as I said, you can reheat this if you want to, and then you can also serve it with a sauce. As you're going to see, I'm going to take it in the dining room and show you how it looks when served and what kind of sauces to put on it. Voilà, this is called, I call this a roulade soufflé au fromage. Roulé en verdure. Verdure means with greenery. You just cut it crosswise. There's a little bit of the broccoli filling. Then I love something like a tomato sauce or a piperade. It's very nice with it. I'm also very pro piperade. And if you like a little hollandaise sauce, it's very nice, which you can put on the side with a little parsley in it. And you could serve it with cold meat or chicken, and a little dry white wine like a Pouilly Frisé or a Chablis would go very nicely with it indeed. And I must say, it happens all the time. Sudden guests and all the stores are closed. But I think you can welcome them with open arms when you have this soufflé roulé-roulade en verdure up your sleeve. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.